Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. I would not blame you if after watching this video you thought I had actually gone mad, because I don't expect this to be nearly as clear as a lot of my other Storyline Explained videos. And that's because I'm basically going to be figuring out as I go, which I always do. I very rarely script my content because I like it to be a bit more organic. But this is such a combination of threads from all over that I don't really know how it's going to come across. Because of that, I really hope that you guys will watch this all the way through to the end before you pass judgment on what I'm talking about here, because I think I'll be most coherent right at the end when all my ideas are down on the whiteboard. And I mean, it's unfortunate because it's already 4:23 AM and I don't think I'm going to be done with this video until about 6. So let's get going, shall we? Today I want to talk about lots of different themes, like I've just said, and bring them all together into one kind of parcel when we're actually ready. But it's going to take a bit of work to get there. I'm going to start off and talk about drills in zombies history. The first time we ever really got introduced to a drill that was significant was in the Nuketown loading screen. It was a drill that people didn't even know at the time was a drill. It was doing something, but it was a big question mark as to what exactly that thing was. I, for a long time, thought that it was underwater. I didn't know what was going on there. I thought maybe this was like the base of an island that was underwater and then drilling or digging or zapping or floating. I didn't know. And no one else did either. And the only other bit of information that we really could get from that thing was that there was someone in a yellow suit doing something, probably controlling the drill. There was a guy like standing near it going, meh. And I guess the last piece of relevant information was that it was the Nuketown loading screen. So you'd kind of assume that it was related to Nuketown in some way, but people were a bit confused. Drill number 2 came in a couple maps later on Origins. We got a kind of sketch, schematic, design type drawing for a drill, and it was labelled as a 115 excavation drill, and it had a similar design to the drill that we saw in that Nuketown loading screen. Specifically, there was one key point that was similar. The rest of it was fairly different. I mean, the Origins one is much more slender, doesn't have the big ball thing on top of it, but it does have this kind of spike shape thing at the bottom. Like, the point kind of has this rough shape on it. So there's a clear similarity, but they are different drills. So drill number 2 is the Origins drill. Now then, we ended up getting more information about the former, the Nuketown drill, in the Zombies comic. I've handily bookmarked the page here. It's actually in the very first issue, but we get an updated version of the Nuketown loading screen right here. And in that updated version of the loading screen, we get a key piece of information added in that at first might seem small, but it's really not. The yellow dude, who we didn't know really anything about for so long, let me get this in the right place, this chap here has a name tag, and his name tag, although you can't really make it out in the print version of this, in the digital version you can, it says Shuster. Now, Shuster is a character who was integral to a lot of the Moon storyline. In fact, he was part of a duo, if you will, with Dr. Groff. Now, Dr. Groff had his time in the spotlight massively so in Der Eisendrache, and then eventually ended up basically eating brick and mortar when we rocketed the moon. I don't think that's a phrase, eating brick and mortar, but it kind of works, so I'm going to go with it. Shuster was always a character who I wished we had more information about, but he was just kept to the side for an unknown reason. But the reason is now becoming clear. Progress. Okay, good. Shuster's there, but we don't have a connection to Nuketown just yet. That's all changed now that Classified has been released. In fact, Classified does a few things to tell us about that Nuketown drill. Because now, at last, we do have confirmation that it is indeed a drill. A 115 drill, no less. We find all this out from our good friend Peter McCain's handler, Cornelius Pernell. He was the bow, and they were his arrows. It's such a good quote. I'm going to play you some of the audio from Pernell right now so you can get a feel for what he sounds like, how crazy that man is in a glorious way, and also we can extract some key details about the drill and about other happenings at both the Pentagon and at Groom Lake, where Pernell is now Station Chief.
This is Groom Lake Station Chief Cornelius Pernell. Personal log, March 11th, 1961. After being unable to get McElroy or Gates to see the light, I hoped my meeting with McNamara would fare better, but I had no such luck. For years now, DoD have run experiments with their 115 division, but we're the ones with all the supply. I told McNamara we have the Fort Knox of Element 115 right next to our nuclear testing site. If we combined resources and worked together instead of simply bartering resources, Groom Lake could receive the funding to properly mine the materials and expand experimentation. But no, McNamara was uninterested. Another Secretary of Defense, another bust for Project Broken Arrow.
I love the smell of fresh zombie storyline radios in the morning. This is Groom Lake Station Chief Cornelius Pernell is how he opens his message. And he goes on to say that he's recording it in 1961, so it's still fairly early days. Classified definitely does not take place in 61, we'll get to that later. And he basically says, for years now, the Department of Defense have run experiments with their 115 division, but we are the ones with all of the supply here at Groom Lake. He says to McNamara, we have the Fort Knox of Element 115 right next to our nuclear testing site, and the presumption is that the nuclear testing site is Nuketown, okay? If we combine our resources, he says, and work together, instead of simply bartering, Groom Lake could receive the funding to properly mine the materials and expand our experimentation. But unfortunately, McNamara was not interested. Another bust for his own little personal project, which at this time he's calling Broken Arrow. So, we've got Pernell, and he's at Groom Lake. We're now going to listen to the second radio from Pernell, and we're going to go through a bunch of these because he tells us a lot of information and a lot of it is really, really useful.
Personal log, February 23rd, 1963. With construction of the moon teleporter ongoing, a number of scientists from the Pentagon's 115 division have been stationed on site here at Groom Lake. Dr. Shuster, head of the operation, continues to be full of surprises.
So we're straight away into 1963, and Dr. Shuster has been mentioned. He's the head of the operation constructing a teleporter to the moon, and he is telling a bunch of stories about Samantha, which is no surprise because Shuster was probably pretty traumatized after all the stuff that happened when we played Black Ops 1.
He's been telling me these stories about an evil little girl named Samantha, that she can control the undead. I asked Colonel Sawyer about it, and he told me to pay it no mind. Apparently everybody's been laughing off Schuster's stories for years now. But then, yesterday, Shuster says he has proof. He claims this Samantha is responsible for several outbreaks over the last 20 years. He rattles off a bunch of names, and one of them was the Rising Sun facility.
Thankfully for us, unlike everybody else, Pernell doesn't just laugh off the stories that Shuster tells about this mysterious young girl. No, he decides to investigate further because of mention of one of the locations where he lost a good soldier, Peter McCain.
I lost a good man there, Peter McCain, and never got an explanation for it. I've decided to investigate this further.
This will end up ultimately being a huge boon for our good friend Pernell, because it's going to give him an excuse to go back to McNamara with a new proposal. Let's listen.
Personal log, July 29th, 1963. I've spent the last several months combing through archives and conducting extensive research. And I can't believe what I'm about to say, but this is real. This girl, creature, entity, this being possesses a very real and very dangerous power. Fortunately, as of now, her attacks have been contained. And if she were to choose to unleash fury, she could wipe us off the map. And not just the United States, she could destroy everyone.
Sounds like Samantha is a little bit of a worry for the United States and the rest of the world. And so, to combat this threat, the Pentagon's gonna need to significantly increase their 115 operation. How convenient. To support that, they'll need greater access to the gold mine at Groom Lake, which is what Pernell says. Project Broken Arrow, his little baby of a project, is the key to all of this.
But there is an opportunity here. To combat this threat, the Pentagon's going to need to significantly increase their 115 operation. To support that, they'll need greater access to our gold mine at Groom Lake. Project Broken Arrow is the key to all of this. 2 birds, 1 stone. We'll combat a threat to national security, and I'll secure the funding for my program and its operations. I'm drafting a report on the incident. I plan to present it to McNamara in the coming weeks.
He says that he's going to prepare to present the proposal to McNamara in the next few weeks. And in the next radio, we hear that he's done exactly that.
Personal log, September 3rd, 1963. The discussion with McNamara was a resounding success. His plans for it are bigger than I ever thought possible. Fools. It was so easy. All those hawks over there think about is war. I offered them a morsel, a nugget, and had the meeting out of the palm of my hand. Yeah, well, good riddance. They'll get their war, and I'll get my riches. They want to destroy this Samantha? That's so narrow-minded.
Hello?
Why destroy her when we can take her power and harness it for ourselves? With the amount of element 115 buried down there, just imagine what we could do.
Happy days for Pernell, because his conversation with McNamara was a resounding success, as you just heard. However, notice that he sort of starts to sound a bit crazy in this radio, just a little bit, but he seems to be losing his grip.
We could mold the earth anew, create it in our image. A toast. Here's to Dr. Shuster for gifting me this opportunity. When we get the excavator up and running at the test site, I'll be sure to get him access. And here's to Broken Arrow. And to opening new worlds.
What a line. In this next one, he expands a little bit on why he's so excited by the idea of Broken Arrow specifically. He tells us about his history, and the fact that some of our favourite characters from the Zombies sort of storyline, Tank Dempsey, Peter McCain, they both lost their lives essentially, or at least he thought so, because of his poor operation handling.
Broken Arrow. Dream of mine for many years. When I joined the company, you know what I did? What I cut my teeth on? I sent men to their deaths. I was a handler. First for the OSS, then the CIA. I oversaw ops, and I sent in men to die. I was a bow. They were my arrows. Smokey, John Banana, and Peter McCain, Tank Dempsey. The list goes on and on. So many men lost.
Despite that, doesn't matter. As far as his management are concerned, he's done a good job, and so he ends up being station chief.
But my ops were good. Job well done. Pats on the back for Pernell. So, climbed the ladder, eventually became station chief here. And spent much of my time, now that I think about it, in this very room. After we'd mined the element 115, we'd store it in here. And we'd stare at it for hours. I got lost in it. And then one day, it just clicked.
And he says he spends much of his time in this very room. After we'd mined the element 115, he says, We'd store it in here, and he would stare at it for hours. Sorry to break it to you, Pernell, but I don't think that's doing you any good, bud. I do not think that's doing you any good. He says, I got lost in it. And then one day it clicked, as if it wasn't just the 115 corrupting this man's poor brain. He decides that he's got to try and harness the power of 115, why does this always happen, and help humanity improve the human condition. I've heard that one before.
I had to do what Group 935 failed to do. I would build a program to harness its power. I was tired of killing. I wanted to create technological marvels, help humanity improve the human condition, and who knows, maybe even bring the dead back to life. Prepare the broken arrow, if you will. Now, I have the perfect test subject.
At the end, he says, ha 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 ha, and now I have the perfect test subject. Now, I don't know if I've got these radios out of order. If I have, then I think it still doesn't fix this issue, but I don't know exactly who he's referring to about the perfect test subject. I'd like your opinions on that in the comments down below. I'll save that for another video. Then, by message number 5 from Pernell, things start to get really crazy.
This is Cornelius Pernell, report 639, August 3rd, 1963. Earlier today, while Dr. Shuster was performing test number 11, we had an unexpected arrival through the teleporter. We've been unable to verify what year they came from. Our struggle with temporal anomalies during teleportation is well documented, but we are certain of where they came from. The moon. This event alone is baffling enough and is without explanation. But it becomes downright absurd when you take into account that I know 2 of the 4 individuals. Corporal Tank Dempsey of the United States Marine Corps, who I knew personally and was declared KIA after a failed rescue op to recover Peter McCain. And Dr. Edward Richtofen from Group 935, who went missing weeks after we formalized the agreement to initiate Operation Stapler. I didn't recognize the other 2, but they and Corporal Dempsey were in a delusional, near catatonic state. Medical evaluation shows they've suffered from excessive element 115 exposure. And quoting our medic, I'm not even sure how they're still alive. As for Dr. Richtofen, initially we believed him DOA. Upon closer examination, we discovered his body is very much alive, just 0 brain activity. How it came to be that these 4 men were on the moon, we may never know. However, for the immediate future, we'll be keeping them here at Groom Lake. They are ideal candidates for additional 115 testing.
So, 4 characters have arrived from the moon. The final Pernell radio, detailing a report from Private Gordon, is hilarious and also deeply interesting for its implications for the story.
This is Cornelius Pernell, report 715, October 13th, 1963. I'm filing this report on behalf of Private Gordon. Private Gordon was working graveyard in Hangar 4, where our new test subjects are being kept. At 0300 this morning, Private Gordon reports a, quote, bright blue oval-shaped light beam materialized in the room, end quote. Out of said light beam stepped, and I quote, a zombie dressed in a World War II German military uniform. This zombie did not interact with Private Gordon, but instead slowly walked up to the comatose body of Dr. Edward Richtofen, who, up until now, we've been unable to resuscitate. Private Gordon then observed this zombie touching the body of Dr. Richtofen, at which point the zombie turned to ash, and Dr. Richtofen immediately let out a guttural shriek and began cackling. I cannot verify Private Gordon's story, but what I can tell you is that as of this morning, Dr. Richtofen is very much alive, and he is very animated. So much so, we've since had to have him sedated.
When did we last see Zombie Richtofen? In this. If we skip through to the last few pages, you can see right here, "You know, I really do hate seeing you like this," he says to Zombie Richtofen. Or, I suppose, seeing me like this. "I really have to thank you. Was this honestly your idea? When you know everything that happens in a story, chronology kinda goes out the window." And he gives himself those blood vials. Blood. It makes sense. I've always been obsessed with it. And then he leaves. That was our last sighting of Zombie Richtofen, but he now appears at Groom Lake. Not only does he appear, he seems to revive Ultimus post-Moon Richtofen, who starts cackling, and they have to sedate him. I don't think a single person on the planet saw that one coming. We also have Dempsey audio, which isn't too important here. It doesn't add too much to what we've already said about the characters arriving, but essentially, he's like, we blew up the damn Earth. Obviously, the Earth is still there where he is, because he's gone to before he blew up the Earth. It's just that he's from a time post blowing up the Earth. Now, he is talking about escaping and trying to fix things, and Samantha warned his group, and, I mean, if you remember the original post-Easter egg end quotes from Black Ops 1 on Moon, Takeo says, "I will destroy every last remnant of 935. And that's basically as much as you hear of their story. So now we know that they made it back, and they made it back in a very weird style. They're there though, and that's what matters. In Hangar 4 at Groom Lake, Dempsey, Takeo, Nikolai, and Richtofen are all alive and well. Okay, so far, this isn't too crazy. We know that McNamara is convinced by the threat that Samantha poses, and he basically assures Pernell that he's going to give him a bunch more funding. We then, on the map, find a schematic for a 115 excavation drill at Groom Lake. It's referred to in the game as the 115 excavation program at Groom Lake, and the design on that schematic basically matches our Nuketown drill. The date when that drill is constructed, supposedly, is 1964, which is really interesting. 1964, 115 drill design is going on our whiteboard. Now bear in mind, much of the meat and potatoes of Classified is happening 63, so that being 64 is a point that could do with a little bit more discussion. However, for now, I want to switch tacks seemingly completely arbitrarily. I'd like to talk about the Illuminati in zombies. The Illuminati are present because Richtofen joins them before he even joins Group 935. He enters the Illuminati in that beginning universe, the kind of Ultimus universe, and the idea, I guess, is that he basically sees a group that can get him some power, and he lusts after it and joins straight in there. And then he sees Group 935 set up by Maxis a little later, and he's like, more power. And he goes in that direction as well. And he kind of builds on things from there. So the Illuminati really enter the story in that timeline in around 1925. It's actually on the behalf of the wishes of the Illuminati that Richtofen actually accepts Maxis' invite to join Group 935, although I'm pretty sure you could make a case for the fact that he would have done it anyway. Now that is in the beginning universe, like I mentioned. You kind of need to switch focus if you want to get to the stuff that I want to talk about in this video. Specifically, we see the Illuminati are present in Ascension and in 5 back in Black Ops 1. Okay, so we know that they have their talons in the Pentagon and in the Cosmodrome. So they're present in 5 and Ascension. If we switch focus again, the Illuminati also come up in Dimension 63. Specifically, On April 16th, 1940, Richtofen arrives in the dimension and contacts members of the Illuminati who, presumably, he had some experience with as an alternate Richtofen in that other timeline, and enlists their help to build a lab beneath Alcatraz. 2 days after that, he meets with Stanley Ferguson and convinces him to also assist with the Illuminati's construction of that same lab. So at this point, in Dimension 63, the Illuminati are on board, Ferguson is now on board, and they're all constructing this lab beneath Alcatraz. On July 3rd, 1941, key date, Ferguson reports that the lab has been completed and the subjects will be placed in the stasis chambers upon arrival. In a case of shockingly good timing, Victis arrives the next day. That means that it's that same day where Primus will end up arriving and collect the Victis blood samples and then go back and continue on their road through to Grod Krovi, then to Revelations, and then etc., all the way through their own loop. The key detail is that Victis are placed on ice. Another key detail is that on October 1st, Ferguson leaves employment at Alcatraz. He just dips out, I guess his job here is done, so he can leave. Then a couple of years later, on April 26th, 1944, the Apothecons destroy Dimension 63. That's just after Morgue City, which means it's after Shadows of Evil, and that's the end of this particular dimension just here. Now, in Blood of the Dead, Richtofen mentions being annoyed at the Illuminati for having the idea to build the lab under a prison in a pocket dimension. And to me, that could be read two ways. It could be read as Richtofen saying, damn the Illuminati, they were part of the decision-making process to build this here in a spot that was likely to get scooped up into a pocket dimension and just happened to be, and that was how fate ended up happening. Or he could be saying, damn it, why did we build it in the pocket dimension in the first place? I'm not sure on which one he's referring to here. I think that both are valid interpretations, and it would seem weird to me that he would choose to build it in the pocket dimension. And it's also kind of weird that he says that it's the Illuminati that chooses where he builds it, because he enlists their help to build it under Alcatraz, so it's a little bit strange. Anyway, we're going to note down that in Blood, Richtofen curses Illuminati choice to build the lab under Alcatraz. Other things that we know about Blood of the Dead are that the Victis characters are there on ice. Now, Richtofen specifically mentions that they've been there for a long time. He even considers waking them up because he thinks, they might be able to help. But then he's like, no, actually, I need to keep you guys safe, you stay put. Now we get to a point now where there's a peculiar passage of time happening that we don't necessarily understand, because in theory, just about here, when Victis arrives on July 4th in Dimension 63, that's when we would expect the Victis characters to enter stasis, to go onto ice. But then, really, it should be moments later that Primus arrives to get the blood and then get interrupted in their cycle and end up having to play Blood of the Dead, basically. And so, if we look at it from time between Dimension 63 Victis arrival and Blood of the Dead map initiation, that's only going to be a matter of hours. So you might have to interpret this, as someone from my buddy Reed's stream said, because I discussed this with him before making this video, maybe the idea that Treyarch have had is that because you've got to do 17 rounds to get through the Easter egg, maybe that is like a large passage of time. Now, I'm kind of skeptical about that being a good answer here, because you can activate the quote where he says you've been there for so long on round 1, so I don't think that's sufficient here. There's also a chance that time in a pocket dimension might not work the way that we expect it to in regular time. You might think about Dimension 63 as having free-flowing time, time that flows forward and is linear, whereas a pocket dimension could have stationary time, where events happen, but time itself is at a standstill, and you're therefore trapped in the pocket. I don't know if that's the way that works. We don't really have enough information about these things just yet to be able to concretely say that, but if that was the case, you could then argue that because time was stationary, infinite time was also passing in no time, and therefore, the Victis crew would have been there for so long, infinite possible time, while also having actually not been there for any time at all. And therefore, the weirdness that we'd have about them just getting there, and then having suddenly been there for ages, would kind of be fixed. Regardless of which way you chop it up, they've been there a long time. We also know that Stuhlinger is still conscious inside stasis, but it's unclear whereabouts that consciousness is. Now remember, if it's in Blood of the Dead, at the end of the egg, Richtofen gets left behind, the characters leave, it fades to black and white, it's very sad, and that seems to be a bit of a full stop for that area for the meantime, for that particular pocket dimension. However, we've also got to remember that if Stu is still conscious here, then this dimension is going to get closed on April 26, 1944. And so we can say that either the fate of the Victis crew is such that something happens after the characters leave on Blood that means that they are freed from that dimension and they go elsewhere, or they stay there indefinitely but they can still think from that place, or they're not there, they're in Dimension 63, and they just do whatever they need to do prior to the dimension itself being destroyed by the Apothicons. I think they're the options there. Now, I'm saying that they need to be conscious afterwards because of the fact that we have quotes from Stuhlinger about new stuff that we've not experienced before in Classified. Now, in those quotes, he knows about all the Richtofens. And he would only know about all the Richtofens if he'd basically gone through the events of this book, he'd got all the way to the end, and then some new stuff had happened that we haven't seen yet that gave him information about all those Richtofens. Up until the end of this, he only actually ever really interacts with one at a single time. He interacts with Zombie Richtofen, and then he interacts with the other Richtofen, but in this message, he's talking about a bunch of Richtofens in a hoity-toity Ricky club. And that doesn't match his past experiences, which means that he's got to be aware somehow of the extra Richtofens. Now, you could say that it's because of the lighthouse, because the lighthouse is interfering with the ether in some way here, but for now, let's assume that he has some further experience that we haven't been aware of yet, although I guess that's less likely seeing as he's in stasis, but we will glide on past that for the moment. I will put down here, though, that the lighthouse causes, and I'm going to call it ethereal interference. He, in those radios, communicates with the bird, seemingly, and the bird is Al, seemingly. So he's got a weird dialogue here between the souls of the mobsters from Mob, and then this new version of Alcatraz in Blood, and with wherever he's thinking from, and whatever he's thinking with a background knowledge of, wherever he might be. We also, in the comic, see the Tranzit crew, we see Victis in the house as kids, with secured innocent souls. I'm presuming that they end up with their safe souls secured after they've been in stasis and after some other events have happened that lead them to the house. I don't think Richtofen has sucked up their souls into the summoning key and blasted them into outer space up to the house at the point in the story that we're at right now. I just don't think that's happened yet, but Richtofen does specifically say in here that he can see all possibilities and realities. He says, "Before my eyes, within my head, I see it all, I see everything, the forces of good and evil battling across all of time and space. It pains and saddens me to say that apparently I've been an agent and an ally to both, but within this book I see each and every possible version of reality play out before me, and one of those versions of reality is basically the kids in the house." We also know in Blood that Great War Richtofen appears out of a cryo chamber. He doesn't know where he is, which is a really interesting point, but he very quickly seems to get a grasp on things and then leaves, leaving our boy Richtofen in the blood machine, the dark mechanism, and basically giving Nikolai the Chronorium to have a read. He says that the cycle is broken. Zetsebo Richtofen is left in the dark mechanism. Okay. We're beginning, slowly but surely, to build up a bit of a picture of what I'm trying to stab at in this video. In here, we have our four characters, our four Tranzit crew, in the very final page of the comic, in fact, the very final frame, in a particular order. It goes Abigail, Rossmann, Stuhlinger, Malton, and we're going to initial those characters as this is the comic order, and it's going to be Abigail Brierton, then it's going to be Rossman, then it's going to be Sam Stuhlinger, and then it's going to be Marlton Johnson. In Blood of the Dead, though, that order is changed. So in Blood, we have a new order, which is Stuhlinger, Rossman, Misty, Marlton. There is a disconnect there, clearly, where basically Misty and Stuhlinger swap places, and we don't know why. Except, we kind of do know why. You see, I was reading through a bunch of my Zombies storyline resources earlier today, making a video about what would happen if we had two summoning keys battling it out against each other. And that video will be linked in the corner of the screen right now and in the description down below. However, amongst that research, I reread a cipher from Gorod Crovey, which goes something like this, and I quote, "Finally, the lab is almost complete. Security measures have been put in place, so the chance of detection by the Americans is very unlikely." I want to pause the message there for now, okay? They're building a lab, evidently, and that sounds awfully similar to what's going on here with the construction of the lab under Alcatraz. Similarly, they're saying that they've put security measures in place to avoid detection by the Americans. The Americans would have been the ones running the Alcatraz facility, and as such, that seems to fit with this being the lab that they're talking about as well. We also have several agents embedded with the staff as insurance, the cipher continues. And the next line is really, really interesting. "We will keep the individuals in stasis, on ice so to speak, and continue the specimen rotation." Okay, so individuals on ice, specimen rotation, sounds like maybe that's why we're getting this rotated order just here. We've got a different order, Stuhlinger and Misty swapping, in Blood and in the comic. Maybe if this cipher is referring to this situation because they're rotating the individuals who are in stasis. It then goes on to say, oh, I almost forgot. The sequencing for the current blood samples is as follows. SS, MJ, A, B, R. That looks awfully similar to the blood sequence that we just mentioned here, or rather the character sequence, I suppose, of our Victis crew on ice. So everything's matching up so far for this nearly constructed lab to be the lab under Alcatraz, and for it to be the one where the characters Stuhlinger, Marlton, Misty, and Rossman are, because they match the blood sequence mentioned in the rotation just there. That's the sequencing for the current blood samples. But there are two problems, and these two problems, in my opinion, are very interesting problems. Problem number one. We heard just here that Victis arrived after the lab had been completed. The lab was complete on July 3rd, but Victis arrived on July 4th. So it would be a bit strange for this message to be saying, finally, the lab is almost complete. We're going to keep rotating these guys who arrive a day later, though. Doesn't seem to make sense. The second issue is much more fun, and that's that I've actually not told you the entire cipher. Okay, I'm going to trace my steps back a little bit here and drop what I'm hoping will be clear as a bombshell, which basically brings together everything that I've been talking about. When this character says, we will keep the individuals in stasis, on ice, so to speak, he goes on, or she goes on, or they go on to say, and continue the specimen rotation once we finish drawing more power from the drill. What other drills have we had reference of in the storyline of Call of Duty Zombies? As far as I'm concerned, you wouldn't be constructing the lab while you had individual characters on stasis with a drill. So I don't think that's what they're drawing power from. I don't think that that makes any sense in the first place. There's another drill in Origins, but that would be really strange. I mean, let's face it, Mob of the Dead and Origins, yes, they were back-to-back pretty much from Jason's team, but it would be a stretch to say they were drawing power from an Origins drill and using it at Alcatraz. Now, another possibility that would, I suppose, sort of be valid is the drill is something that they're using to, like, drill into the island of Alcatraz itself to build the prison. Personally, I don't believe that. I think that that just doesn't really fit what we know about the construction of the prison, but I wanted to mention it here as a kind of devil's advocate argument. And with those considered, unless I'm missing anything really obvious, which I don't think I am, I mean, like I think I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if I recall correctly, you've got things like the mining facility are buried, you've got the moon excavators, none of that really feels like a drill to me. I think the only real remaining option is the Nuketown drill. And we now know the Nuketown drill, seemingly, to be this drill that Shuster was operating. And Shuster is the head of the team constructing the moon teleporter, and he's working hand in hand with Pernell at Groom Lake, who is the Groom Lake station chief. Now, Groom Lake have the 115 supply at that test site, at this site that they're digging at Nuketown, because it's near their nuclear testing facility. And it's at Groom Lake, where Pernell works, where the Ultimus characters end up falling through time and landing after the events of Moon. And so, I think I have found one of the first tangible connections between Blood of the Dead and Classified. I didn't ever really think I would say that, because I thought these maps were going to be very separate. But I don't think that they are anymore. We have one other thing happening in Classified that is a really big deal, but it seems like a really small deal. There is a paintings Easter egg in which you start off and you have Ultimus Richtofen and a blank portrait next to him. So I'm going to label that as BP for blank portrait and UR for Ultimus Richtofen. He's old, he's not wearing his hat, which we'll come back to in a second. That's the painting setup. There's also Dempsey in the back, but he's not relevant right now. Now there's an Easter egg that you can do in Classified, and when you do it, those paintings switch around, and you then fill in this blank portrait, and you get rid of Ultimus Richtofen. So Ultimus Richtofen becomes a blank portrait, but on the other side, you don't just replace the blank portrait with Primus Richtofen, you don't replace it with a new character, you don't replace it with anyone other than the one and only Primus Nikolai. Primus Nikolai somehow makes his way onto the portrait in Classified, when you do that Easter egg. Now that's bizarre for the following reason. There's been so little crossover between Ultimus and Primus over the years. You'd expect that they would have bumped heads sooner, but they just haven't. And if you look at the timeline and the way that things work out, it's basically in distinct sections of things where they are linked. You get all the way back at the beginning, links when the Great War is going on. So you're in the beginning, your Primus are there, they're doodling away in the beginning timeline, which is eventually the Ultimus timeline. They disappear in the year 1300. It takes us all the way until 1925, until we first hear of one of the four characters, Nikolai Dempsey Takeo Richtofen. Like, it's actually that long. 1300 to 1925. So there's a huge gap there. Then later, they end up bumping heads again in The Giant, but a key point about The Giant is that right before the events of The Giant take place, there's a fracture, okay? You see, when that clock ticks onto the hour hand, things kind of freeze over, and there's a fracture in time and space. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the former link that I mentioned of the Great War premise is less of a stretch than things happening later in history, because I'm kind of viewing the different timelines here, the different universes, as stemming from a similar point. And so what I'm thinking is that at this early point in time, in 1300, when the Great War's happening, it's not really that much of a stretch to go from over here and to kind of jump to over there. But then later in time, in 1925, I think that it's a bigger stretch to go from over here in one universe and for Primus to then cross over and go to the Ultimus timeline down there. And because of this, I think, and again, this is just from a conversation with Reed, Rattlesnake 27, from earlier today, I think that there are very few, if not no, intersections of Primus with Ultimus, bar one or two very specific events such as that Great War and such as things post-Giant. There might be some dabbling here and there, but I think it is minimal. But it's not minimal anymore now that this has happened in Classified. This is a very, very clear symbolic switching of roles. Ultimus Richtofen is no longer in the position that has deemed him worthy of being deified in the Pentagon of all places. And instead, Primus Nikolai has taken his place. I think that's bizarre. And I think that it's bizarre that that change coincides with, what do you know, the one and only Blood of the Dead end cutscene. We get to the Blood of the Dead end cutscene, what happens? Richtofen is left behind, Primus Nikolai takes the Chronorium, it's his immortal soul that is going to be key, that is going to be a cornerstone of the fight against Dr. Monty. So this stuff here really is coinciding with, where is it? This thing just here. Now, that was a tangent. I need to walk it back to talking about the drill again, because we still have problems even if the drill is this nice drill that we talked about up here. What exactly could be happening regarding the drill that would be relevant to Alcatraz and require them to draw power from that so that they could power stuff that they were doing at Alcatraz on a rock in the middle of a body of water? It doesn't really make much sense unless there's something going on with cryostasis in zombies that is different to cryostasis that we've seen in other popular culture over the years. And I would be inclined to really push in this direction because of the weirdness that we have with Stuhlinger in Blood of the Dead. One of the things that I was saying to Reed is that I think it's clear that we have a problem in zombies right now where we have a single location, which is the lab under Alcatraz, but that single location is in multiple places. I know that sounds weird. Bear with me. The single lab location where the Victis crew are stored is in Dimension 63, because that's where they step into them, but it's also in this pocket dimension, which is either some kind of mirror of Dimension 63, or it's some kind of extra bubble that grows from it, or it's just an alternate timeline of it, or something. There's some weirdness going on there that we can't really grasp at just yet. But whatever it is, we kind of have to be content with the fact that Dimension 63 has a timeline where Victis enter the pods, and then they're there, certainly until the dimension is closed. But then similarly, they're also present in Blood of the Dead, because we play in Blood of the Dead, and they're there, and that's in its own pocket. And so what I'm wondering is if it's possible for there to be some kind of, and I don't want to say teleportation here because it's the wrong word that I'm looking for, but if there's some kind of temporal bleed between characters in stasis in different places but the same location, or maybe even different places and different locations, then that could give us an idea of what's going on with the phone in Classified and with Stuhlinger in Blood of the Dead, with the ethereal effects interfering because of the lighthouse. It's all infinitely more difficult to get your head around because I don't have all of the Stuhlinger quotes just yet from Blood. And so I can't see exactly what he said there. And I can't see exactly what he has said in Classified either, because I haven't had a chance to get to those quotes just yet. I've been too tired, I've been working too hard on other videos and Easter egg guides and everything, and streams and Easter egg hunts, and so there's even more for me to get to, and that will make this all a little bit more clear. But if we gloss over some of the patches of lacking knowledge in my little discussion here, we can say a few things. If, and only really if, the drill being mentioned in this Gorod Crovey cipher is indeed the Nuketown drill, that gives us a direct link to Classified from Blood of the Dead, because they're using, at Blood of the Dead, some kind of drill energy to keep those pods in stasis. The alternative view is that in one of those different locations, different places scenarios, those pods are being powered in a place that is not Alcatraz, i.e. those pods could be in classified somewhere, like in Groom Lake, and we wouldn't really know about it, and that would make much more sense for the drill's power being sapped and used to power those pods. But Victis would then be in a location which we don't expect them to be in. However, we do hear that they have moved at some point because in those classified radios, Stuhlinger is saying, "You moved us here of all places?" It would not surprise me in the slightest if that comment that he made was about them being moved to Area 51, to Groom Lake, because Stuhlinger goes on and on and on and on as a character about being abducted by aliens and about little green men and about all those sorts of cliches that surround Roswell, Groom Lake, Area 51. And so it would be the perfect irony for him to have been brought to Area 51 and held in stasis after Blood of the Dead. And it would fit perfectly with that quote because of that. You brought us here? The place that I've been talking about for the last 20 years, about hating and wanting to avoid, and that I maybe thought I already came to? Area 51? Really, Richtofen? You couldn't think of anything else? I just think that that would be a good fit at this point. So, maybe we're gonna see, in the classified Easter egg, the Victis crew somehow making their way from either Dimension 63, or from Blood of the Dead, or from somewhere else entirely. Now this is where things get even weirder. Blood of the Dead, pocket dimension. Dimension 63 gets closed off. Blood of the Dead doesn't necessarily give us a reason to believe that Victis are going to be removed from there. I think that their place of stasis is actually on Earth, and I think that it's a reflection of their stasis in Blood, as opposed to them being present in the same kind of physical way. It's all a bit wishy-washy, but then again, all of this is because we're working with stuff that we have no idea about right now. And so they can die in Blood of the Dead. It's not an issue, because they're still there in Dimension 63, and there's time in Dimension 63 where they could be moved elsewhere and it wouldn't be an issue. The only issue is that in those years of Dimension 63, we don't, in the timeline, have mention of that happening with Richtofen's involvement at least. Richtofen reads the chronorium, we read his reading of the chronorium via the timeline, and he doesn't mention the Victis crew being moved. And as such, I think that either it would need to be someone else that was to do the moving in Dimension 63, or it might need to not be Dimension 63 where the moving takes place. It might need to be post-cycle break. And if it's post-cycle break, I don't know if they're going to be able to go from Blood back into Dimension 63 without causing further wibbly-wobbliness. They probably could, and if that's the case, then that's fine. That would have been something that wouldn't have been in the chronorium before. The pages have changed. Now they can just jump back in there. They can get Victis from the lab where they just were, and then bring them to Area 51 if need be, or do whatever else they want with them. But I thought that that would be worth mentioning because it's a little bit of a sort of snafu in some of the thinking of what's going on here. I also think that there is a chance that after all of this discussion, the drill that they're talking about is just a different drill. Now I think that would be really weird because they've given us a very important drill right there, like a really important drill. And I think that amongst the other things that we have hints to about the children being safe in the house, about there being a classified end cutscene that we haven't found yet, about Stuhlinger hating Area 51 but it being the perfect place for him to be brought to, and then to ironically go, here of all places? It would be a great tie-in for the story, for the characters to butt heads, and something that I haven't even mentioned yet is that we know at some point that Ultimus Richtofen is going to be with Primus Nikolai, Primus Takeo, and Primus Dempsey, and they are going to go to the house together. And if that's going to happen, those groups need to join up. And it would make sense if they joined up in Classified in the Easter egg, so they could then springboard to the house in the future couple of maps whenever they're going to release in the DLC season. It does also, though, leave the question remaining of what's going to happen to Great War Richtofen, but I think that I might have to save that one for another day. I hope that my ramblings here have been coherent and have given you a nice idea about what happens to the Transit crew after Blood of the Dead, how they are saved, where they are going, why this is related to the classified main quest Easter egg, and a whole bunch of other questions as well. It's obviously all at this point circumstantial evidence. It's difficult to draw any concrete lines. I could talk all day long about what happens within Blood of the Dead and the story of the Warden and how he's so tightly interfaced with the Shadow Man, and the Shadow Man talks to him about all these crazy things and it makes the Warden go kind of crazy, and I could talk and talk and talk about that. But I wanted to get this out now because I found that cipher saying, finally, the lab is almost complete. I mean, that doesn't match either. The lab's almost complete, so it's a shifted version of Dimension 63, which I guess could be mixed in with the reason that they end up getting there late, because it's a completely shifted dimension. Ooh, maybe that's what it is. Maybe we could call this Dimension 64, and in Dimension 64, things are a little bit different. They get there late because the lab isn't finished being built yet, it's sort of in construction, it's in the wrong place, stuff like that. Maybe that's the way we're going with things. I don't know. But I wanted to post this video anyway as soon as possible because it's currently, 5:47 a.m. and I had the ideas bubbling around in my head and I figured that you guys would want to know. So I guess I'll be posting this tomorrow evening because I can't really post videos at 6 a.m. No one will watch them unless you turn on notifications. So go ahead and do that, click the bell, turn on notifs, and I'll hopefully see you very soon in more sort of zombies storyline explorations? Whatever this has been, more of this. See you guys soon. Bye-bye.